What is going on, everybody, and welcome to this month's tutorial video. In this tutorial video, I'm going to be showing you how you can open specific scenes in Unity by tapping on your Firebase cloud messaging notification. And so the reason you might want to do something like this is, say your player gets a notification for a game that you're playing, and then they want to tap that notification and go right into that game and not have to worry about going through all the different kinds of menus and navigating to which specific game they're getting the notification for. They can just tap the notification and go right to it, so it makes it a whole lot easier for your player. So one thing to note, this is going to be an Android only tutorial. I am using a bit of a workaround that's not going to work on iOS. Basically, with the notifications, normally you'd want to use the click action property. However, with the click action property, it calls an intent, and that intent opens an activity in your application. And I haven't been able to quite figure out how to attach a specific intent or an activity with a scene in Unity, and that was just getting a little bit more complicated. So I figured out a way, a little bit of a workaround, and I'm going to be demonstrating that. I made a little diagram to show off how that works, but ultimately, unfortunately, this is not going to work on iOS. If I do figure out how to get it to work on iOS, I will definitely make a new tutorial for that. So the one prerequisite you will need for this video is you're going to need to watch my first tutorial video for Firebase Cloud Messaging, and that's basically just setting up the Firebase Cloud Messaging console and setting up a basic Unity project so we can send push notifications to a device. Once you have that working, you'll be all set, because in this tutorial video we're just going to be using the Firebase console to send notifications, so there's no crazy PHP coding or anything like that like there are in my other ones. However, if you are using PHP, you should easily be able to follow these same steps, and you should know exactly what you need to do and put into your PHP code. Anyways, before we get into the tutorial, I'd just like to say thank you very much for stopping by. If you found this video helpful and you enjoyed it, make sure you hit that like button. Also, feel free to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, for much more tutorials like this one and lots of cool independent video game development related content. Of course, if you have any questions for me or suggestions for future topics, feel free to drop those down in the comments section below. But with all that out of the way, let's get right on into the tutorial. Enjoy. So before we get into the programming, I just wanted to show off this little diagram that I made that basically explains the idea behind what we're trying to accomplish. And it shows off the 4 different use case scenarios that we'll run into. And I just want to make sure that you all have the idea of how we need to handle each of these cases. So on the far left side, we have the 2 different ways that we'll be able to open our Unity application. So one is just the normal launch icon that you'd use from like your home screen on your Android device. And the other is through the Firebase Cloud Messaging notification. And then for both of those cases, we need to determine how we should handle it when the app is closed or when the app is open but in the background. So this would be if you switch to a different app and then you say got the notification and then you clicked on it from there, and then it cycles back to your Unity application. So starting in the upper left here, when our application is closed and we press the normal launcher icon, we'll just load into what I called SC01, and that's just the first scene that we would normally want to open. Now if we say press the home key, put the application in the background, we do some other things, and we want to come back to it, we can definitely go find our application on our home screen and press it, and in this case we want to just resume the current scene that we are in. So it doesn't matter if we're in scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, we just want to bring the user back to where they were. And there's nothing really too special about these 2 use cases. Basically, this is what normally happens when you create an application through Unity. We just want to make sure that with the rest of the programming that we do, we want to preserve this behavior. We don't want to ruin that for any reason, because that would definitely break the user's expectations of how to use our application, which would lead to a poor user experience overall. All right, so now we're going to go over the use cases for if you're launching the application from the notification. So if the application's closed and you receive a notification for your app, what we want to happen is we're going to load in SC01, just the normal first scene. And then from that SC01, we're going to load the scene from the FCM data. So the notification passes some data, and we're going to be able, in the SC01, to extract that data and then use that to load the intended scene. Now, if our application is open in the background and we click on the FCM notification, we're going to want to resume the current scene, so whichever scene was already open before we closed it and put it in the background. And then from there, we'll extract that scene data, the scene that we want to load, and then we'll actually load that intended scene. So this is basically showing off that little workaround that I was mentioning in the intro of this video. All that's going to happen is it's just going to load the initial scene, whether that be the main SC01 or whichever current scene the user left off on, and then we're going to extract the scene data of what scene we want to load, and then we'll actually load that scene. So without further ado, let's go ahead and program that. Alright, so real quickly, I'd just like to give you a brief overview of my Unity project just so you can kind of understand what's going on here. So basically, this is the same Unity project that I've been using for this whole tutorial series. So as you can see, we have 3 different scenes this time around. So we have SC01, and this is just the same scene that we've been using that makes sure that you have a device token. And the only real difference is in the Firebase controller. I've also added this scene controller script, and I'll be going over that in just a little bit. But the other scenes we have are scene 2, SC02. All this is just a green background this time around, just to kind of differentiate it from the others. It just says scene 2. And then SC03 is more of a red background, and it says scene 3. So those are the 3 main scenes that we're going to be working with. And then we're going to open up our build settings, and we're just going to make sure that all 3 of these scenes are in our build settings here. So going back to SC01 and the Firebase controller here, we can go ahead and open up this scene controller script. Alright, so in our scene controller script, we're going to want to start off by including the scene management library. So we'll do that just by saying using unityengine.scenemanagement. And that allows us to use the scene management library, which is what we'll be using to load different scenes within Unity. Now, moving down, most of this block of code here, basically all it does is it makes our scene controller what's called a singleton. And a singleton is a programming concept where we basically ensure that there's only one instance of the scene controller object. And that allows us to do a lot of really nice things, such as easily call public methods and things like that. But in this case, we want to make sure that our scene controller is in every single scene and only one is in every scene. So we use that don't destroy on load here, and that basically ensures that we'll be able to use the scene controller in any scene, no matter what scene that we're in. And if we were ever to go back to our original scene, we would destroy any new instances of the scene controller just so our code doesn't get confused. Again, this ensures that there's only one scene controller instance. The only other notable thing in the awake function here is we want to check if we're using an Android device. So we just use the pound sign, say pound if unity_android, and then we'll set our isOnAndroid variable to true. And then also, if we are on the Android platform, we're just going to want to set the screen.fullscreen variable to false, and that just basically gives us access to the home and back buttons and things like that. And then scrolling down to our next main function here, we have the void onApplicationPause function, which takes in a bool variable, which we'll call appPaused. Now, the onApplicationPause function is a function built into Unity, much like the start or update functions, and it is called when the application is paused, so if it goes into the background or something like that, or when it is resumed. So it is called actually when you first start up the application, and it is also called if you put the application in the background and then you return to it. So within this function, we just want to check for a couple things. So if it is not on Android, or if we're running in the editor, we're just going to return. Otherwise, we're going to get a bunch of errors and stuff like this. So this basically just ensures that it is running on an actual Android device. Now, if the onApplicationPause function is called and appPaused is set to false, that means that we're returning to the application, so we can just put a little debug message saying application resumed, and then we'll start the coroutine load scene from FCM, and this attempts to load our scene. Otherwise, we're leaving the application and we can just put a debug.log message saying application paused. So now we'll scroll down to our load screen from FCM coroutine, and this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the whole thing here. Now these first 4 lines here, they're very important. They may seem a little bit confusing, and that's because we're actually going to be using a couple things that we wouldn't normally use in Unity, but we can use them to actually call different Android functions. So the end goal of these 4 lines of code is we want to get the string variable for the scene to load. So we basically just want to get the title of the scene that we're trying to load. And I'm going to go through it line by line in just a sec, but in order to get this string scene to load, we get that from the current intent, and we get the current intent from the current activity, and we get the current activity from the Unity player. So if you're at all familiar with Android development, you may recognize the terms activity and intent. If you're not familiar with it, an activity is basically one focused thing that your application can do, and an intent is the way we actually call that. So there actually can be multiple intents for a single activity, but that is just a very brief explanation on that. So now starting from the top, we just make an Android Java class called Unity Player, and we set that equal to a new Android Java class, and then what we want is the com.unity3d.player.unityplayer. And now that we have that, we can create an Android Java object called curActivity. And we'll set that equal to our Unity Player Android Java class, just from right up here. And we'll call the getStatic method on it, and we want it to be of type Android Java object. And then we're going to pass in current activity. And so that assigns the current activity to this new Android Java object called curActivity. Next, we're going to do something similar. We're going to make an Android Java object called curIntent. And this time we're going to take our curActivity and use the .call function, passing in a type of Android Java object, and we'll use the getIntent function. So this gives us the current intent of the application. So we're actually going to create our string variable called scene to load, and we'll set that equal to the current intent dot call. We're going to use a type of string, and the method we're actually going to call is getStringExtra. So each intent can have a little bit of extra data attached to it, and in the case of us opening our application through the FCM notification, we're going to add some FCM data to it when we send our FCM notification. And so the key value that we're looking for is scene to open. And we're going to be setting this key value in the Firebase Cloud Messaging console. So we're going to remember exactly how we spelt this and capitalized it and everything like that, because it's going to be very important for our code to find that key to give us the correct value. So basically this line takes the current intent of our application, uses the getStringExtra function to look at the extra data attached to that intent, and then looks for the scene to open key, and then once it has that, it'll assign that value to the scene to load string variable. The next thing we're going to want to do is create a scene variable for our current scene. So we'll set that equal to our scene manager.getActiveScene, and we'll be using that in just a moment here. So now if you're looking ahead a little bit, you can tell that this is kind of where we actually load our scene. But if you remember back to the diagram, there are actually 2 cases where we do not need to load a new scene. And so this if statement is going to check for those 2 cases. So the 2 cases we want to check for is if the scene is closed and we're opening the application, or if the application is open in the background, but we are going to be loading the same scene that we're already in. So if we're opening the application from the home screen, this scene to load variable is not going to have anything in it. So we check the is null or empty, and we want to make sure it is not is null or empty. So this means there is some data in the scene to load variable. So hopefully that's not confusing, but it's not is not null or empty. So it means there's something in there. And we want to check for if the scene to load, the scene we want to load, is not the same as the current scene's name. So again, this line may be a little bit confusing, but all we're checking for is if there is data in the scene to load variable and that data is not the same as the current scene's name. So anyways, if we pass this if statement, we'll just put a debug statement saying loading scene, scene to load, and then we'll use these two lines here, the handheld.setActivityIndicator style, and we'll set that to Android activity indicator style.large, and then the handheld.startActivityIndicator function itself. And then basically all that does is it puts like a little circle on the screen that kind of spins around. So it basically shows that your application is doing something and not just frozen or stuck or something like that. However, to actually get this to draw on the screen, we need to do a yield return new wait for seconds 0f. And all this does is it waits for the next frame to proceed with the execution of the load scene from FCM coroutine. And this allows the activity indicator to actually be drawn on the screen. So once that activity indicator has been drawn on the screen, we can finally call our scene manager.loadScene scene to load, and this should load the correct scene. Also, if you want, you can increase this variable to, something like 5, just so you can kind of get an idea of what that activity indicator looks like. Because when you just have it at 0, this screen will just kind of flash by pretty quickly and you may miss it. But we'll just leave it at 0 for now. So anyways, we'll just come back over to Unity, go to our build settings, make sure once again we have our SC01, SC02, and SC03 all added into the build, and then we can go ahead and create a build of our game. All right, so now that we have the application installed on our phone, we can launch it and make sure everything is working properly before we start sending notifications to it. So with the app closed, we'll hit the launcher button. You'll see it starts loading up our application here, and then it will load us right into our first scene. Now, if we just go ahead and put this application in the background, it's still open, but in the background, as you can see here, we'll go ahead and click on it, and it brings us back into here. Once again, hit the home button. It is in the background, so we'll hit the launcher icon, and again, it just opens up the application in the same scene without reloading it, just as it should. And so now we'll just go ahead and close the application, and then we can start sending some notifications to it. So over here in our Firebase console, if you'll remember, we want to go down to the Grow section here, hit the Cloud Messaging button, and then we'll just create a new message here. So for this example, for message text, we'll just say, click me to load scene 2. Remember, the message label is just something for ourselves so we can organize it. Of course, we'll want to send it now. And for testing purposes, we can just send it to all Android devices running our application. And so we're going to want to make sure to expand the advanced options down here. And for title, we'll put just load scene 2. And now the really important part is under this custom data section. We want to put this scene to open key. If you'll remember from the code right here, this is that key that we're looking for in the get string extra on our current intent. And the value we're going to put in is SC02. So this is the scene 2 value. So now we'll go ahead and send this message to our phone. So we'll hit send message and send, and any second now. So we can just scroll down here and you'll see that there is the load scene 2 notification, which says click me to load scene 2. If you'll remember, we have no applications open right now, so our test push notifications app is closed. So we'll just go ahead and click on the notification now. You'll see it launches up the application. And you'll see that we are loaded into scene 2 with the green background. And so again, just to test our behavior here, if we hit the home button, our application is in the background, and then so if we go back to it, we resume it, it just stays in scene 2. We can hit the home button and we can relaunch the application by hitting the icon from the home screen, and it just brings us right back into where we left off. It doesn't need to reload the scene or anything like that. And back over to the Firebase console here, you'll see here's the message here. We're actually going to duplicate this and send it again, just so I can demonstrate. We want to make sure that we still have this scene 2 open in the background. So we'll just send this same message again. Go ahead and hit send, and then we get the notification. So we can go ahead and scroll down on it. We'll say click me to load scene 2. And one more time, it just brings us right back into the scene. Doesn't need to reload the scene or anything. And then the last thing that we want to check is we want to make sure that we can actually load a third scene. So just in the Firebase console here, we can go ahead and just duplicate one of these scene 2 messages. So we'll just go ahead and change all these scene 2 things to scene 3. So click me to load scene 3 for the message text, our message label. It's going to be load scene 3. Scrolling down, our title, let's load scene 3. Now we don't want to mess with the key for scene to open. All we want to change is the value. So we'll change it from SC02 to SC03. So we'll remember that this is the title of the scene that we're trying to load. So we'll just go ahead and click send message here. And then you'll see we have a new notification for load scene 3. And as of right now, we still have the scene 2 open in the background, but that should be no problem at all. We'll hit the load scene 3 and boom, we're loaded right into scene 3 like nothing happened. All right, so that's just about going to wrap up this month's tutorial video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. Also, feel free to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already for much more great tutorials like this one and lots of cool independent video game developer related content. Of course, if you have any questions for me or suggestions for future topics, feel free to drop those down in the comments section below. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.